Welcome life science learners to another installment. Trust that you guys are well and excited about our lesson today. In our lesson today, we're going to continue with environmental studies. We will pay special attention to looking at the nutrient cycle. Our focus of our lesson would be on the carbon and the nitrogen cycles. We've got to recollect that we've in the past looked at other cycles such as the oxygen cycle as well as the water cycle. It's important that we understand the context of these in the biosphere and in the environment. Let's get into the overview of the lesson. Let's try and understand what are the concepts that we're going to look at and then get straight into the details of our lesson. In our lesson today, we're going to focus on firstly reviewing some important terms, and as I always mention, as you start off any lesson or as you start off your preparation on any topic, try and draw up a list of vocab and terms that are important to this section. We're going to focus on these as well as we get through the lesson. We also spend some time talking about what are nutrient cycles, and then we're going to look at some of the important atmospheric gases, especially when we come to looking at the nitrogen and the carbon cycles. We know that the atmosphere consists of gases, of which nitrogen and carbon are a significant portion of. And then we'll get straight into the carbon cycle. So let's look at some terminology that is important. We often talk about this in the context of ecology, and ecology again is the study of the relationships between plants and animals with each other and with their non-living environment in which they live. And it's important that we recognize that when we talk of the nutrient cycles, we're referring to the non-living components of the environment and how these influence the biotic factors. And hence, it's important that we have context to these cycles, looking at how the carbon cycles and the nitrogen cycles influence other organisms in that ecosystem. The next term, as I mentioned, is ecosystem. Again, this is defining a specific area in which the abiotic and the biotic components are interdependent and interact closely. It's important that we recognize that in ecology we have small areas called ecosystems, and in these ecosystems we have the biotic factors and the abiotic factors that interact with each other and are interdependent with each other, and that is what determines an ecosystem. The next concept is abiotic. Again, the concept of abiotic refers to the non-living components, and in broad we speak about factors that influence the environment such as temperature, rainfall, sunlight. We look at the quality of the soil. We also look at the physiographic factors or the lay of the land, and that was the aspect, the slope, as well as the altitude. So those are the abiotic factors. We also need to go back and look at biotic factors, and these are the living components. Again, so those are the components that produce the energy from your plants to your producers and consumers and the different trophic levels. So those are your biotic components. If we then look at the concept of biosphere, we know that it's that part of the earth where humans and other organisms are able to live and interact with each other. And a recap of the biosphere again referred to three components: the lithosphere, the atmosphere, and the hydrosphere. Finally, the focus of this lesson would be on the nutrient cycle. Again, the nutrient cycle is a repeated pathway of a particular nutrient or element, so those are the building blocks, from the environment through one or more organism and back to the environment. The concept of a cycle refers to a continuous flow of a specific substance. In our nutrient cycles, we're going to look at essential elements, which are the building blocks of complex molecules, and we're going to look at how these move through the environment from one organism to the next and are cycled in that environment. We're going to pay special emphasis to carbon cycle, which we've done in the past, but that refers to the circulation of carbon in various forms through nature. So carbon in its different forms is the carbon cycle. Nitrogen cycle, again, is the biochemical cycle by which nitrogen is converted into multiple chemical forms as it circulates among the atmosphere, terrestrial, and the marine ecosystems. So that's going to be the focus of our lesson, looking at the nitrogen cycle and how nitrogen as an element moves through both aquatic life forms as well as terrestrial life forms, as well as those organisms in the atmosphere in terms of the gases and other organisms. The oxygen cycle, we've discussed this in the past, is whereby atmospheric oxygen is converted to carbon dioxide in animals and respiration and regeneration by green plants through a process called photosynthesis. We also know that the water cycle is an important part of the hydrological cycle, which is referring to water, which involves the continuous circulation of water on the earth and the atmosphere system. Finally, guys, it's important that we have a thorough understanding of the nutrient cycle. As I mentioned, it's the biotic components of an ecosystem that depend on the abiotic components. Here we look at nutrients being obtained from the environment and are used by living organisms to grow, reproduce, and stay healthy. So we refer to those as the essential characteristics of living organisms. And so nutrients are important for these important processes such as growth, reproduction, and general metabolism or functioning. The most important elements required by organisms are oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen. And these are known as your macronutrients. Again, macro in the context of being larger quantities. So we need these in large quantities and are important in building important biological compounds. There are other nutrients that are required in smaller quantities, and those are called trace elements. And these are those elements such as phosphorus, sulfur, iron, and other elements that are really required in micro quantities. And hence we say these are essential, but in very small quantities. And these are important elements that are needed for the production of your organic compounds. And organic compounds, we refer to those that are produced through a biological process. And examples of those are carbohydrates, lipids or fats, your proteins, and other important biological compounds. It's important that we understand that the nutrient cycles ensure that nutrients are available for use and reuse over and over again. And the context of a cycle means that these are recycled in the environment continuously. It's important that we look at the atmospheric gases, and we know that the atmosphere is made up of a whole host of different gases. And we know that even though carbon dioxide makes up only 0.4% of the atmosphere, it is an important gas needed for photosynthesis. On the other hand, nitrogen is a large component of the atmosphere, 78%, and it is important for all organisms because it is necessary for making important biological compounds such as proteins and nucleic acids. As I mentioned, nitrogen is forming a significant proportion that we look at. With carbon dioxide, again, although in a very small percentage in the atmosphere, is still a significant element in nature. In our lesson, we're going to focus on the carbon as we move forward. Carbon is a basic building block of all organic materials and therefore of living organisms. Most of the carbon on Earth can be found in the crust, with some in the oceans and most available in the atmosphere. Carbon can move from one reservoir, essentially in the environment, to another by the following processes. And we'll overview these processes. A process called combustion, photosynthesis, metabolism, cellular respiration, precipitation, and the process of decomposition or decaying. This is an overview of the carbon cycle. We've looked at the main processes, guys. It's time that we go for a break. When we come back, we will look at these processes in detail and get a better understanding of how carbon is cycled in the environment and is an important component of all living organisms. So have a little stretch break, get some oxygen into the muscles, and get ready for the next bit of the lesson. Short break and I'll see you now.